So I believe we'll make a start then. Hello, welcome everyone to the ICA-SUV webinar. We're really excited to have all of you here. Thank you for making time, especially at this time of the year. It's very busy. We're very grateful to have our panelists also in the room and the ICA team. Since you've been in the room, you've heard all of my conversation. We had scheduled to, we invited and were hoping to have a few other people in the space as panelists, but they were unable to join us for different reasons. But please do know that this is our space. So even though at the moment we can't see you, we do want to ask you to contribute. You can use the chat function. You can use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. This is a space where we hope we can look at these big questions around diversity and EDI and archives and professionals from a global context, but that also means that we'll have different reference points. So we hope that we can use this space to go a bit deeper, to respectfully move through, navigate, learn, challenge one another, but also to remember that we're part of this bigger picture. And with all of the things happening in the world, I think it's really beautiful that we can come together and talk about this work and to move from a place of love and hope. So without further ado, we will make a start. For those of, if there's anyone in the space who would benefit from an audio description, I am a woman sitting in a cream-colored chair wearing a black jumper. I have olive skin tone. My long black hair is pulled up and I have golden hoop earrings. And yes, so please do feel free to ask any questions. We try to get the transcription function working. We're not sure. Zoom plays tricks on us sometimes. So if there is any need or a question or anything that you need support with, please do reach out to myself or to Ellen, and we will gladly support you through that process. So I hand over to Ellen, who is representing the ICA-SUV today, to say a few words. So Ellen.
Thank you, Rosa. Hello, everybody. It's morning here in Dakota land, which is currently named the state of Minnesota in the USA. And I am I identify as a white woman. I have European American heritage, and I am wearing a rust-colored top with some gold jewelry, and I'm sitting in my office at home. And I would like to say welcome on behalf of ICA-SUV. I'll put a link into our site if you'd like to get more familiar with our organization. And on behalf of the Bureau, which is the Executive Committee, and our President Chair, who is Caroline Brown, we really are grateful you're all here for the conversation. Thanks so much. This is brought to us, courtesy of or because of, we were able to get some ICA Programme Committee funding, which is wonderful. And with that, we were able to enjoy Rosa's leadership here again on a project for us. Last year, we did one on ethics and archives, and I can put a link later into the chat on that if you'd like to read more about last year's project. So we're modeling this year on last year, and we're just very grateful you're all here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. So I will now allow the panelists. We have brilliant panelists in the space who, just so everyone knows for context, we had a first initial lab day where we had a few more panelists from today, but a few more people come together from various countries, discuss the questions that we will be focusing on today, and also decide collectively if there were other questions that we should consider or other panelists that we should invite to this public lab day. So this is actually part 2 of an ongoing conversation. And it feels important to say that because it's not that the ICA is kind of parachuting in and dictating, and a few people are saying this is what needs to be or this feels important. Rather, it was a really co-created collective way of looking at these questions in this conversation. So having said that, it is going to be a discussion, and please, if anyone has just come into the space, please do use the chat function to tell us where you're coming from, who's in the room. If you want to share any contact details, please know that this is a public space. But please do let us know where you are, because that will help us also reference and understand who's in the space, because we can't see you. But use the Q&A or the chat. So Anjali, would you like to start by introducing yourself and where you're coming from, please?
Sure. I think a few participants have mentioned that the chat is disabled for them, and therefore they're not able to have a conversation there, that they're only able to post in the Q&A section. So if there's anything you can do about that, great.
I will investigate that. Yes.
Right. Hi, my name is Anjali. I'm an archivist. I work at an archive called Archives at NCBS, the National Center for Biological Sciences here in southern India. I've been an archivist since the pandemic, since 2020, and we are a public center for the history of science. We collect, we are mostly a contemporary archive, and we collect material related to the history of science in India. Yeah.
Thank you. Deepika?
My name is Deepika. I'm Anjali's colleague at the archives at the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore in southern India. I have been working at NCBS like Anjali for the last year, and before that I worked at another science archive in Bangalore, and before that I was a journalist. So I've been an archivist for maybe 5 or 6 years, but I still feel like a baby in the profession.
Thank you. And now Rebecca.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Adams, and I am currently an archivist at the London Metropolitan Archives. And I mostly focus on community archives, and mostly Black community archives and their collections. I was also the ICA new professional for this year as well. So hello to everyone if they were in Abu Dhabi as well. But my focuses are decolonizing archives, thinking about kind of anti-racist practices, and community archives mostly.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think if we could start by, the question is, how would you describe diversity or EDI work in your context or in your country? It is a big question. And I'm also aware that you are individuals working within these institutions. So it feels like you're a representative, but we don't want to say that. We also want to remember that, you are human working in this, and that might create a tension. So just offering, and whoever would like to start.
I'm happy to start. So in the UK, in terms of thinking about diversity and EDI, there is a somewhat of an idea and a definition, but it's very specific to different institutions, different groups, different organizations, and it very much depends on how they feel the definition, how they define it. because it very much depends. It depends on if the institution wants to set out EDI in a specific way, or if they want to think about equality over the diversity or the inclusion, or they want to think about the inclusion over the diversity or the equality. It very much differs. But when it comes to thinking about how it's understood, I think it depends on the individual. I think a lot of it depends on kind of how an individual thinks about what they view as kind of equality and what they view as diversity, depending on kind of what group they belong to, what community group they belong to, and the specific organization. I mean, for me personally, when I think of EDI, I think of kind of I guess I think of it in a different way. I think of it more so in terms of making society or making the profession or whatever it is more inclusive, and thinking about bringing more people from lots of different backgrounds into the fold, rather than everyone looking a certain way and having a certain way that they think about certain things. But obviously what I think might be completely different to what someone else thinks. So I think there's very much it very much differs, I think, in the UK specifically. I think if you were to ask like a random person on the street or someone within an organization, I think they would have different terms and different ways that they would think about it, and different focuses as well. So yeah.
I think Deepika and I discussed this, and this is my question. So I'll take that up. In the Indian context, when it comes to EDI and diversity, we have in our constitution, we have something called reservation. So we understand diversity along lines of caste and gender. And we have, similar to affirmative action in the US, we have something called reservations here in India, which is a way in which you get more equitable distribution of resources and opportunities to people who have historically not have had access to it. And that's one way to understand diversity and EDI in India. Another access would be to look at it through gender as well. Again, access to opportunities as well as resources. So that's another access in which we've had a lot of conversations at EDI in India. And another way would be language as well, because we're a very diverse country and we have multiple languages, and who gets access to information and who gets access to resources is also determined by the politics around that. So, and as an archives in India, one of the primary ways in which we look at EDI is just making all our material accessible and bringing material into the archive that would otherwise never enter a science archive. So just looking at what sort of material can come into our archive and just enabling diverse perspectives and diverse people and their stories into our archive. And second thing is ensuring that more people will have access to our archive, and building a platform in such a way that by the end of next year, we'll just have more and more people having access to all our material that we are archiving and digitizing here. Yeah. And as an individual, I guess I would look at EDI as a way to just ensure that any sort of minority and marginalized communities have more equitable access to resources as well as opportunities. Like, that's how I would see it. But we're a very big country and we're very diverse bunch of people. So there are like different ways in which people understand this, as Rebecca said. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Deepika, did you want to say anything? Because I know you guys had a conversation before, but is there anything for you now? Yes.
Maybe the only thing I would add to what Anjali has to say is that I mean, you know, like Rebecca says, I think everyone looks at it differently. I think different organizations and different people do as well. I mean, I think there's everything on the spectrum from EDI being a sort of corporate buzzword to, you know, to organizations sort of seeing it as their core goal. I think there's a spectrum really, but in India we also have there's an archives collective that we are part of. It's called Milli, and last year Milli put out a code of ethics along with a guidebook on law. I mean, just understanding how the law applies to archives in the Indian context, and there was also a code of ethics that a group of archivists met and decided on, and inclusion was very much a part of the code of ethics. Not just, I mean, on various levels. One is access, in terms of people being able to access archival material, whether that means better access for people with disabilities, better metadata, you know, description, and also in hiring practices, in creating a safe working environment for people from different backgrounds. So it's, I mean, it's a code of ethics that people, you know, that people from different organizations and from different backgrounds sat on and decided on. But it's not something that, you know, I want to stress, it's not something that's enforceable, or, but I mean, these are conversations that have been happening in the last few years. Yeah.
And at this point, if anyone in the chat would also, or of the attendees would like to contribute or say anything that's coming to mind, you can use the chat, the Q&A, or we can also try to give you allow you to enter the conversation. So, and I'll keep saying that to encourage that this is a conversation that we can all contribute to. So please do feel free to say anything and share. I see the chat is being used. There are different links coming in. Thank you, Deepika, for sharing the link. I was going to, because you shared it with me after the first lab day. So thank you for putting that into the chat as well. And this idea of a code of ethics, it's, you know, ethics within archives. And, you know, we discussed this a bit last year with our project that we did, and we created a resource and we offered that to the community, but it feels like, again, that's an emerging thing, this idea of ethics in relation to diversity and inclusion. Someone said in the chat, Patricia, accessibility. So perhaps we can follow that conversation, we can follow that train of thought a little bit more. Any thoughts around that, on the intersections of accessibility and ethics and diversity, and how, in a maybe dreaming big way, that might happen, and then in a more practical way, how these things might be able to develop? Any thoughts?
I think when it comes to thinking about ethics, I think something that has come up quite a lot recently in terms of, like, you know, like conferences and talking to different archivists in the UK, is the idea of like data protection, especially when it comes to thinking about archives of the community. And I think that there can be a disconnect sometimes when it comes to researchers or academics or community groups wanting to access specific records of their own community, of an own individual, and the archive having to kind of rein it back and say, actually, you can't have access to these records because, you know, they're sensitive. You know, we've got a you know, time period that we have to, you know, that we have to obey, you know, and kind of trying to have that conversation can be quite difficult, because I think a lot of the time, for a lot of people, it can seem very much like this kind of conspiracy, like they're trying to hide things from us, especially if you think about the historical connections when it comes to like empire and colonialism and that kind of thing, when actually you know, you have to actually talk with the individual and talk with the groups and actually say, actually, this isn't, a veiled conspiracy. We're not trying to hide this from you. We wish you could see all these documents, but the problem is that because we are under a code of ethics, we are under these different policies and law, that we physically cannot let you access these records, even though we know, as archivists, we know that this would be really interesting for someone to have to view. So I think that can be very difficult when it comes to thinking about kind of the relationship between ethics and EDI, and kind of wanting to allow, like the Black community, the South Asian communities, access to these records that will probably be very beneficial for their own historical exploration, but knowing as well that you've looked through this document and you say, what, no, this needs to be closed. This person's still alive, this person said this about whatever organization or individual, and they probably wouldn't want that out in the public domain. So I think that can be one of like the really big challenges when it comes to thinking about ethics and kind of the work that we do. And I think it's really important to have that transparency with the researchers, with academics, with stakeholders, to be able to make sure that they're aware that these things can actually come up. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I think one, I mean, in addition to what Rebecca said, I think that it's EDI is easier on paper than it is in practice. So when it means you have to change your hiring policies or kind of sort of change the nuts and bolts of how your workplace functions, I think that's really where the challenge lies, to take it from being an idea that everyone feels in theory is great and we have to it's something we have to follow, but actually implementing it in your day-to-day life, which means maybe giving up some of your privileges, which means maybe doing a lot of hard work. It's simpler to sort of carry on as you were before, but there's hard work and effort and resources and money that goes into ensuring an equitable workplace. And I feel like, that's also to some degree where the ethics comes in, that you can have an archives policy that says we are an inclusive archive, and you can say that we are committed to these things, but who ultimately holds you to that? I think there's a gap between theory and practice. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I acknowledge that Ruth has put in the chat, wondering about creating guidance to be able to share with researchers that would be transparent about the material and access. Yeah, any thoughts around that? Or Ruth, if you'd like to offer any ideas around that comment, please do say. And changing direction takes time, thought, reverb, and conversations. Absolutely. And this idea of reverb, I think, creates a really nice visual that it moves, and sometimes that reverb might be quite big, sometimes quite small. And I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts around this idea of change and how it happens. Because it is quite tricky. It is, this brings me to my second question, which is, and I'll put it in the chat as well, is diversity in EDI, these terms and these concepts, is it crystallized? Is it clear in your context? And if it's clear, maybe in theory, how does that happen in practice? Yeah, any thoughts around that?
Well, I think when it comes to thinking about kind of terms, I guess I kind of mentioned that in the first question, but I think it very much depends on the organization. I think there are a lot of different organizations and groups who, you know, some, like I said before, some focus on the E, some focus on the D, some focus on the DI, some focus on all of them. I think it very much depends on the group and how and what they feel is potentially important. I think EDI, I think at this current moment, I think EDI can sometimes be seen as a buzzword, because it's kind of just, it's used to encompass a lot of different things. And I think there are probably I'm sure there are probably a lot of organizations that are probably, and groups who probably are trying to like dig into that term and actually look a bit more deeper into kind of, but what does this actually mean? What are we actually trying to propose here? What are we trying to prove, etc., etc. But yeah, to basically answer the question about thinking about whether it's a specific term or topic, I think in the what's the word, in the grand scheme of things, I'm sure it, and probably in society, it's viewed as very a very crystallized topic and crystallized definition. But if we dig a bit deeper, there's a lot of people who are having conversations about, but what does this actually mean, and what can this actually mean for us as an organization, or what we're trying to achieve. I think it very much depends.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And I acknowledge that JS has said, I work in the United States and EDI is arguably the primary topic in the American archives discourse right now. I'm curious in your countries how central or marginal EDI advocacy in archives is. Are you all part of a big movement, or are you alone? Thank you for the question. Anjali? Yeah, Deepika, yeah.
Sorry, Anjali, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you please, Deepika. Yes.
Sure. About the movement part, are we part of a big movement or are we alone? I mean, just speaking on behalf of me and Anjali, we're in an archive that's part of a larger collective, an archive that has, I mean, we are the main drivers of the collective. So I don't know that we're representative of a large, of every archive in India. But I mean, I think we're a smallish group. I don't know that I don't know that there is a sort of central platform for discourse, for archives across India. So I mean, it would be hard, I think, just to talk in terms of some sort of unified idea. Yeah. And in terms of whether EDI is a crystallized concept in India, as Anjali mentioned, we do have reservation, and that is, I mean, it predates the term EDI, but it's founded on the, its basis is the principle of ensuring access to people from different communities, especially ones that have been historically marginalized and oppressed. So reservations tend to be more enforced in the public sector, in government institutions, and less so sometimes in the private sector, in private institutions. But I mean, that it certainly is. I mean, it is a factor in the workplace in India, but there is also, reservation is by no means accepted by everyone as being kind of the best way forward. And I mean, I think it's also something that I think a lot of people don't take for granted in India, in the sense that it's enshrined in the constitution, but constantly under threat. And so it's, it is we have reservation today. It may not be around, forever. It's not something that I think we can take for granted.
Thank you, Deepika. Anjali is coming back. She dropped off, but I think she's coming back. I also see that Ruth has asked a question. Moving concepts from abstract to concrete. Are there current ways of visualizing concepts concretely? Any thoughts? And this is, again, open to anyone in the space if they would like to offer any ideas or suggestions or raise their hand and contribute audibly, they can. So back to the question, are there current ways of visualizing concepts concretely? Ruth, did you mean like with using artwork to help make a point, or does Rebecca or Deepika, do you want to?
I was literally just gonna say I definitely think there are ways of sorry, I'm looking at the question again. Visualizing concepts concretely. Yeah, I think there are I think it's just looking at things in a different with a different lens, and kind of, I think in the past, I think archives has been a very kind of set way of looking at things. You know, these are the guidelines, this is how you work with the material, and this is kind of like how it ends. When actually we all have to kind of start thinking about archives and the way that we present archives and the way that we present the way that we view archives differently. I think that's definitely something that's moving along. Well, personally, I think it is in the UK, but obviously there's a lot of different perspectives. But I think it's just thinking about what the concept is and what we're trying to get from that specific, what we're trying to get from it specifically. And I think it's also making sure that everybody comes together and everybody's on board, because I think a lot of the time as well, it can be this kind of thing where it's like, oh, you have an idea, you're the only archivist or records manager, whoever it is with this idea, you sort it out, when actually we need to be like a team, we need to be a collective and actually say, okay, this is how we want to present whatever it is that we're thinking about, because, you know, we always need more support, no matter how much we might say, oh no, we don't, we always need people behind us. I don't know if that answered the question. My apologies, Ruth, if I did not, but yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Thank you. Yes, so Katie's question, have your institutions made any, in your opinion, successful changes to make your spaces more inclusive, diverse, or equitable? And I think that takes us to this next part around kind of maybe more concrete examples or case studies that anyone might have, whether the panelists or anyone in the space would like to give examples or put links in the chat, or any kind of small or big things that we need to celebrate, because also, you know, we don't want to only autopsy what's not working, but also look at what is working, so that shared learning can start to happen. So yeah, I open it up. Any examples or case studies that you want to show, or changes that have been made in your spaces to allow for more inclusive, diverse, and equitable working conditions, or yeah, actions? Anyone?
Happy to speak again. Sorry, everyone's probably absolutely had enough of my voice, but where I'm working currently at the London Metropolitan Archives in the UK, we have an EDI group where we're actually reviewing our catalogues. So we have millions of documents, and our history spans from 1067 to the present day. So there's a lot. And it's because it covers the whole of London, there's a lot of colonial records, there's a lot of terminology and language within the records that are very archaic and very harmful. So we have a group together where we're going back over harmful language, and basically reviewing it throughout the whole catalogue and seeing how we can potentially keep the original terms, but change, add context, change specific wording so that and adding trigger warnings, for example, and trying to kind of think about how we catalogue and how we can expand on the ways that we think about cataloguing. I think as well, a lot of times when it comes to being cataloguing, it's very much a lot of the words used are very much in the voice of the cataloger. It's not necessarily about adding context, adding necessarily the historical context. It's about, this is a paper from the East India Company, or this is a manuscript from whichever era, when actually context would, we know that researchers are going to come into the archive and look at specific documents, and they're likely somewhat to know the context, but there are some people who won't. There are some people who are searching specific terms, and while they know they are harmful, they might not want to keep looking at those harmful terms and that harmful language over and over again. So we're currently basically reviewing our whole catalogue with specific terms. Most of them are connected to race, but we're expanding it to think about gender and disability. And yeah, and I mean, it's a very long process. It's a very long, I wouldn't really call it a project because it's always going to be ongoing, but I think it's one of the ways in which EDI is being processed in a way to actually affect archives in general and kind of make a positive have a positive effect on the way that we catalogue, on the way that we archive material. So yeah, that's what we're currently doing. But I know there are a lot of other organisations in the UK that are doing similar things, and are doing similar work. But I don't have their names at this point, but I know that they're doing lots of really interesting things.
Thank you,
Right.
Rebecca.
Is it okay if I come in and talk about the work, what we're trying to do here? So we are an archive of science, and the easiest stories in some sense of science to tell and collect are from a very privileged layer of society, and people who engaged with science, practiced it in India. They usually come from a certain background and with a certain level of privilege. So we've been trying to make a concerted effort to ensure that we don't tell just the easy stories or collect material that are easily available. How do you create an accession policy that is far more difficult to do as an archives team, and it's a lot more work and a lot more time. And but how do you ensure that stories and people that otherwise do not enter the archive get a space, and how do you collect those stories? How do you ensure that, like what Rebecca said, how do you describe them in a respectful fashion and an accessible fashion for everyone? So I guess it simply came, I think yesterday we were chatting about it, Deepika, and I just came from a point where we just wanted to see more people like us, more women, for example, in the archive, and just their stories reflected, so that it's just the work of archiving becomes more engaging for us as archivists. So it just came from just there. But I think we've sort of had a chat with our funder to just have that conversation, be like, can we focus on diversity, for example? Like, how do you get more diverse material? How do you collect it? Have a collection policy centered around that, and then develop capacity so that this can be described and made accessible.
Yeah, if I may, our funders were really, I mean, this was a conversation that we thought a lot about having with our funders beforehand, but the fact that, I mean, they were receptive to it, and that sort of actively, that sort of changed our workflow now for the next year. I mean, that's wonderful, but it also happened because women outnumber men in our organization. And, we just, at some point we conversations over tea and coffee about, can we do something different? This is getting boring. And, can we sort of apply our resources in a more meaningful way? Because, we as Anjali pointed out, we very easily get the kind of stuff, we're quite easily able to collect archival material from people who are upper caste and who have worked in large institutions. But it takes way more to find, say, women scientists who are willing to donate their material, who, it takes about, it takes loads of time to convince somebody that their material is valuable and should enter the archive. It takes resources maybe to travel to whatever part of the country they live in to collect this material, or sometimes we have to talk to them face to face. So it's, in terms of targets as well, it may not be the same volume that we, that our funders have seen in, say the previous year that we worked in, but we were able to convince our funders that, maybe volume isn't the metric. Maybe we change the metric itself on how we assess this. And I think we were able to do this because of the team, the sort of dynamics of the team, and the people in the team, and I think our identities within the team.
Thank you. There have been a few things in the chat that I'll go through that have also been questions for each of you. So Tara says, examples or case studies can be helpful ways to communicate or explain the concepts more concretely. Yes. And Rebecca says, do you develop diverse exhibitions or symposia that focus on diverse communities, those of some of the ways that we are more inclusive? Any thoughts around that? Exhibitions, symposia, and other, yeah, Rebecca.
I currently have an exhibition called Unforgotten Lives. I'm rediscovering African, Caribbean, South Asian, and Indigenous peoples from 1560 to 1860. I feel like I did the title wrong. I will put a link in there to make sure I have the right title. But it's basically created from a data set that we had in the early 2000s of baptism records, where we basically wanted to look through. We basically wanted to show that London has always been a diverse place. London has always had individuals from lots of different backgrounds within it. Black and Asian people did not just, turn up in, the early 1900s, 1800s, etc. They've been here for a lot longer. I think I think that was that. I mean, it's on currently, but it's actually, I think it's been really successful in kind of showing a more diverse history in a different kind of way. And also it means that we can bring more people through the door in terms of people who are doing this type of research, who are interested in this type of research, and kind of think about what now. Yes, we're thinking about the history of the past, but what about the present, and how can we move forward in terms of bringing more diverse histories into archives in the future, and kind of making those connections and those collaborations with different organizations to be able to answer those kind of questions. I think exhibitions and kind of symposiums and collaborations can really do that, and kind of bring in new ideas that you might not have thought of before. But I definitely think there's a push in the UK to try and present more diverse histories through exhibitions and artworks, and I definitely feel like I'm seeing that more. Yeah.
Yes, Anjali, I see there's a little bit there.
I think we also have an exhibition space at our archive, and I've just been here for a year, and I've just seen two exhibitions which were put up by a group of artists who usually collaborate with the archives, and they set up exhibitions around different themes. And for the last one, for example, the focus was on gender and biology and flowers as such. And so it was interesting to see how an exhibition will just bring an audience who otherwise wouldn't turn up at an archive. So it just enables different people who have never been to an archive or understand what we do here to just come in and see the space, and the exhibition sort of becomes their first entry point into the archive and using it and learning about it and things like that. So it's just been a really interesting way to bring people into an archive, and yeah, it's part of our structure here, and it's been really rewarding in that way. Yeah.
Thank you. So it sounds like there's a real kind of consensus here that that archives and the relationship with exhibitions or symposia allow for some. I love this what you said, Rebecca, bring in new ideas, or allowing new things to come in, and as you said, Anjali, that different audiences start to engage and are coming in, and there's something I think about that, getting people into a physical space that they might not enter, that is actually, I think, something to celebrate, because it's not easy. And if you're not in the archival world or profession, that might feel a bit intimidating. And so, I think that's a great example. And if either of you have, or if anyone in the space has any examples of exhibitions, of images, or anything that might be related to an exhibition, please do put those in the chat, and we'll pull those together, and then we'll make those resources available to everyone at a later point. I do see also Saman has said, reflecting on the previous question, phrases like diversity and EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion, as noted by Deepika and Rebecca, are commonly utilized as buzzwords in numerous organizations in the Indian context. Unfortunately, they often devolve into tokenism projects. This is, as I have observed in my limited experience, is due to the absence of well-defined institutional policies that outline and contextualize the significance of these terms for the organization, along with the tangible goals they aim to achieve. Thank you for that. I see we're all kind of nodding, so there seems to be a lot of agreement that that there's a real kind of we have to be very careful about how we use these terms, and this idea of tokenism, I think, is reminds me a little bit of what you said, Rebecca, earlier, that we all need to be working on this. This isn't just one individual or one group or one country's responsibility, but that we all play a role in this conversation, and that we also have a place in the conversation, which is also a reminder to everyone in the space to please contribute, because this is the hope of the method and the kind of madness behind the LabDay, is that we have different profiles and different people in a space to talk about these questions, and that diversity and richness allows us to find a shared language in some way. So please do, and thank you to everyone who has been contributing. Joanne says, though far from perfect, I've seen some slight changes to challenging power and privilege structures in an organization. Example, embedding EDI in recruitment, or compulsory questions in job interviews, or person specifications regarding showing demonstrable commitment to EDI. And where head of the organization built EDI into operational plans, for example, instill that EDI is everyone's responsibility, or linked to all individuals in collective actions and staff performance appraisals and strategic commitment drives, and better allocation of resources to EDI actions, reparative cataloging projects with community consultation. So thank you, Joanne, for those very specific examples. And I think that, you know, that's a really interesting little blurb to take and to think about, you know, how you might, if you are in one of those senior leadership positions, these are some actual examples of things that you might consider. And, you know, maybe if anyone wants to talk to Joanne, I'm offering you, Joanne, as as someone to people should contact. But, you know, I think it's nice to see that you have seen some of that, some of those changes. I don't know if anyone else would like to contribute or reflect on that comment. It's a big comment, a big. There are lots of links also in the chat. Oh, thank you, Rebecca. Yes, and Katie says, I love the title of this exhibition. Yes, Mapping Black London, Unforgotten Lives exhibition. Yes, thank you. So we've been talking about, we have about another 10 minutes together. People have been asking questions, but I'd like to remind you, if you have any specific questions that you'd like to raise, now would be an opportunity to do that. Yes, Rebecca, yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to, because I know that I just wanted to highlight one of the questions when it comes to thinking about supporting younger archivists and supporting archivists of the younger generation. And I think, sorry, I just thought it would be really interesting to bring up. I think it would be yeah, I guess as a younger-ish archivist myself, I just thought it would be interesting. Sorry, didn't mean to derail the conversation.
No, it's something that came up also in the Spanish LabDays we had, this idea of the generational not say responsibility, but, you know, how we navigate some of that generational, whether that's the training one generation might have, and now the training that a younger individual might be having, or an early career archivist or professional might have, and what is the responsibility, and how do you negotiate some of that, and where are the challenges and where are the benefits to that? So I do think that there is something there around that it's not necessarily only about race, but that there is age, and that, you know, gender and all of these other aspects also contribute to this conversation. So more concretely, I'll ask, the generational aspect to archiving and being in this world, how do you navigate some of that, and where are maybe some of the benefits, do you think, to being a younger generation, or if you've been in the field for a long time, how, you know, how is that? How does that feel to navigate some of that? Any thoughts?
Sorry, I was just going to say, when it comes to thinking about kind of how we supporting younger professionals and people who want to come into the profession, I definitely think, and I was actually talking to my colleagues about this earlier, actually, about kind of what they also think is something important as professionals and archivists who've been in the profession for a lot longer. And I guess I was very much saying, you know, like transparency, and I feel like I say this word all the time: transparency. But I think transparency can be really important, because I think, how do I describe what I'm trying to say? I think it's making sure that you're honest with younger professionals. I think definitely in the UK it can be quite difficult to navigate the job situation, for example. There's a lot of short-term contracts, there's a lot of funding issues, and it's about having the conversation where it's like these areas can be difficult. I've also mostly been a project archivist, and we're also having this conversation about projects, and I think I think there's a lot, there can be times when I think archivists and I think we can all have this in any job where we feel like we have to finish everything. We have to make sure that we hit the deadlines perfectly. We catalog everything perfectly. Everything is like put in a box and put in the strong room, and that's done. When actually that isn't realistic. I think making sure that we are what's the word I'm looking for? We have the conversations with ourselves and with each other that we don't have to do everything perfectly. We don't always have to. A project does not have to be completely finished. We don't. I think there's we put a lot of responsibility on ourselves to make sure that we get things done, and we get things done, you know, as fast as possible. You know, short-term contracts, we've got 6 months, you've got 8 months, you've got 9 months, etc., etc. When actually, I think we need to realize within ourselves that, like, it's okay if we don't finish this specific project perfectly. It's okay, you know, and I think that is something that I've reckoned with throughout my career, is going, okay, yes, I didn't completely finish this project perfectly, but you know, there are some things that we all can't do perfectly, and I think that's also something that I think I try and tell young professionals. I'm like, you might not finish this, but we all know that you put a lot of effort into it, basically. And kind of hitting those targets can be quite difficult, and that's okay. But also obviously making sure that we empower each other and we empower young professionals to want to carry on, really. And also making sure that people understand that the profession is changing. It's a lot more, in a lot of different ways. It's a lot more geared to thinking about working with people. There's a lot of outreach, there's a lot of working with different communities, a lot of working with different stakeholders. It's you know, we have to talk to people, and it's not just sitting in a strong room and cataloging in a basement. It's the profession's always changing, and so I think also making sure that younger professionals are aware of that as well, is also important. And just general support, really, just making sure that. And I also think something that's really important as well, I think, for young professionals, is having some kind of mentor figure, as I think it can be quite difficult to navigate the profession sometimes, especially when you're new, and it's kind of finding someone who can potentially help you out a bit at the beginning or the middle or wherever it is also really important. Okay, yeah.
Thank you. Anjali, did you want to say anything?
Thanks, Rebecca. Like, actually, yeah, that's something I have to tell myself at the end of every day, which is that I should just give myself a break and sometimes just stop doing the archiving so that I can just come back and do it better. Otherwise, you just get caught in that entire cycle of wanting to finish every little project that you're working on. Yeah, like when I started off with archiving, there was this point where you do not know where to look for resources, and you do not know where, for example, in India, like, for example, where do you buy your archival boxes from, or how do you source them? And for example, Millie was a great resource that way, like just to have an archivist collective where they would have annual meetings. People from different archives in India would join that meeting, and they would have these discussions, and all of a sudden the resources became accessible. And there were people that you could reach out to and understand, oh, you're in the same boat as me, or you're also struggling against this particular deadline or sourcing this particular material. And all of a sudden, having that sort of a network to fall back upon is really, really important. And otherwise, you sort of feel like you're facing these problems just by yourself, rather than with like so many other people who are going through the same thing, and just struggling with finding resources or funding or sourcing material, archival material. and all of that. So it's been incredible to have that sort of network and have an annual session that you can sort of join and meet other archivists and sit down and have that chat. Yeah. I'll also upload a link to Millie here as well.
Thank you. I see Ruth has asked a question: how can outreach be made to those with uniqueness to be included in the profession? I think this was when we were talking about kind of generational work and kind of that relationship. While you think about that, I'll keep going through the questions in chat. Patricia said, wonderful conversation, need to go. Well, my next meeting, gracias. Thank you, Patricia, who's no longer here. And Ruth has said, been noticing the need for outreach. So this idea of outreach and actively pursuing or investing and allocating resources, because, you know, I think that there's also a point here around might be the intention or the will, but sometimes there's a compromise that needs to be made, and that might be lack of time, lack of someone at the organization to do it. And yeah, so I think that's, you know, just drop that into the conversation. Rebecca says, great conversation and we need more. I have to leave. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you for the link, Anjali, to Millie that you've referenced in your last answer. And Katie, I have to get ready for another meeting. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, everyone. So it seems like people are slowly leaving the space. So in that, I think we will also very gently bring our conversation to an end. There have been lots of resources put into the chats and different perspectives, different examples that have come up today. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming, for being part of this very important, very complex and layered conversation. And there is no one way to do this work. There are multiple ways, there are multiple perspectives, and each context, country, organization will interpret that in a number of ways. And I also would like to just you know, thank everyone who's been actively listening and actively participating in the chat, also our panelists. If there are any final words or thoughts in these last couple minutes that you'd like to just get off your chest, now would be the chance to say that. Yes. Deepika, Anjali, Rebecca. That's the order that you are on my screen. There was no kind of intention behind that. Yes. Any thoughts? Anyone in the chat or in the attendees, please feel free to share.
I just want to say thank you for facilitating this conversation, and I hope it moves, I mean, for everyone here, and I hope we're able to sort of take these ideas and put them into practice at, you know, at some point. Yeah.
Yes, same here. Thank you so much for facilitating the conversation. It's been, yeah, really, really lovely. So yes, thank you as well. Yeah, really lovely conversation.
Thank you to both of you. I mean,
Thank
putting all of us together. I hope next time, like, I think more people join as well. I think there were 2 people who were there last time who are not here today. In the last conversation we've had. So yeah, hopefully we can take this forward and learn all our learnings and put them into something.
Absolutely. And if there's anyone in the space who wants to try and run a lab day or facilitate a lab day in your context, I'm happy to have a chat and to talk through kind of some of the thinking and structure or framework around that, and offer any support in making that happen, because it allows, I think, for a richness to come through. And yeah, that's an offer to anyone in the space. So Ellen, any final words from you?
Well, from ICA-SUV, I just want to offer my thanks to everyone for being here. And personally, as Ellen, I would like to say I'm just so appreciative of everyone, including each attendee, because that shows commitment. We're all, every time we hear someone else's story, we learn something. And I think listening is really critical. And that's what I've been trying to do today. So thanks everyone for the opportunity to do that and to join this group. I think community and a sense of collectivity is really important when we do this work. So that's it. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day or evening, wherever it may be in your part of the world.
Thank you. Thank you. And there is a Padlet that you can contribute to. It's an ongoing conversation. So please feel free to also share any thoughts there. Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. And Ellen, if we can try and save the chat in some way, then we can collate all of those questions as well as the links. So thank you. Have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.